morning. Good morning. Thank you for your flexibility in coming over here to worship. I don't know a time that the air conditioning will be fixed, but I hope it's soon. And, we need to be here where there's a little bit of air conditioning. As the doors are closed and the air conditioning blows, we'll probably be cold about sermon time. It's nice to be back. I was away for a week of study leave. I was in class about 10 hours a day at the Zephyr Point Conference Center in Nevada. I've been there once before to that part of Nevada, and it's so different. On the eastern side of the Sierras, it was hot and dry. Where we were on the western side, it was cool at the altitude. It was so different. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I enjoyed that conference center, and I hope I've learned some skills that I can bring back as your transitional pastor and help us and help the PNC. We need to keep praying for our pastor nominating committee. Really good and exciting things happening here in the church. Just a few announcements. You all see an announcement about Luella Nazareth's service next Sunday. Sorry there was some confusion in last week's bulletin, but it's on the 30th. In the afternoon. It'll be nice to gather and remember her. And the called congregational meeting next week, well, it's time to start thinking about new elders and deacons, and we will elect a committee to find that next class of elders and deacons. Lots of items on the save the dates, and so I encourage you to read that in the back of the bulletin. I've been gone all week. Are there any other announcements that need to be highlighted? About overlooked something, elders, deacons? It's good to be together. Let's worship God.
Join me with the call to worship. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork.
Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge.
The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple.
The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart
be acceptable to you, O Lord,
my rock and my redeemer. You'll notice that we have an insert for the hymns this morning, and we're going to be singing. If you are able to stand, that would be wonderful. please join me for the confession of sin?
Eternal God, whose covenant with us is never broken, we confess that we failed to fulfill your will. Though you have bound yourself to us, we will not bind ourselves to you. In Jesus Christ, you serve us freely, but we refuse your love and withhold ourselves from others. We do not love you fully or love one another as you command. In your mercy, forgive and cleanse us. Lead us once again to be the people and the church you call us to be. In Jesus' name.
Hear the good news. Christ died for us. Christ rose for us. Christ reigns in power for us. Christ prays for us. Anyone who is in Christ is a new creation. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. Believe the good news of the gospel. In Jesus Christ, you are forgiven. Thanks be to God. Please pass the peace of Christ to each other. Peace be with you. And also with you. Our first reading is from Psalms 116, 1 through 4, and 12 through 19. I know you don't have pew Bibles, so you just have to listen to me. I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and my supplications. Because he inclined his ear to me, therefore I will call on him as long as I live. The snares of death encompassed me. The pangs of Sheol laid hold on me. I suffered distress and anguish. Then I called on the name of the Lord. O Lord, I pray, save my life. What shall I return to the Lord for all his bounty to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones. O Lord, I am your servant. I am your servant, the child of your serving girl. You have loosed my bonds. I will offer to you a thanksgiving sacrifice and call on the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people, in the courts of the house of the Lord, in your midst, O Jerusalem. Praise the Lord.
We'll have to adjust this as best we can. Thanks for your flexibility, as I said earlier. I think we may have to take longer for the shaking hands time and the passing of the peace. It's so fun to see and hear you all interacting with each other. part of being away this past week gave me a chance to reflect on our church and all that's happened in the last year. And one of the things that I thought about and was pleased with is how after church, how so many of you all collect in little knots and talk with each other. And perhaps some of it was COVID several years ago, but we didn't have that joyful feeling and interaction and conversation last summer. And it's so good to see now. And some of y'all are new and don't know what I'm talking about, and don't worry about it. But feel free to stay in here a long time after church and talk with each other and be the church together in conversation and friends. And I like that so much, and how we are friends and in conversation with each other. I'm wearing a new stole. You all who were here last week heard about it. I just found it in my office. But it says VBS 2023 on it, and these must be the handprints of the children who were at our VBS, maybe some of the teachers too. It was such a great week of VBS. Many of you all were here as volunteers in a lot of different capacities, and I am grateful. I'm very grateful for all that you did to teach our children about Jesus. It's so fundamentally important. The last thing I'll say is something that some of you all heard, you saw on the Inspire. You should read your weekly Inspire that gets emailed out. But I spent time this week with Andrew and Martha Miller. Andrew was the youth pastor here, and Martha was the director of Christian education 20 years ago. And they kept rattling off names and asking about so many of you all. And they remember Ocala well. And he is one of the many people this congregation has sent into ministry, because you all sent him off to Louisville Seminary, and he has served the last 20 years as a pastor in Kentucky and Michigan, and he is glorifying God in many ways. And this church has so much to be proud of, including those folks that we've sent into ministry. Let's go to God in prayer. Lord God, we do praise you. We praise you for this congregation gathering together and talking and loving one another. I'm grateful for the love that's in this room and wherever we meet. And when we meet one another on the street and we see each other and are glad to greet one another in the name of Jesus. The friendships that have formed in this church and continue, and the folks that this church has sent into ministry over the century and a half that we have been a church. I'm grateful for each one here, Lord, for our love for one another. I'm grateful for visitors who are here and for those who are watching us on YouTube. Lord, bless each one as we gather in our own special ways. Lord, I'm grateful for so much. Grateful for those who have served this country and our communities. We often pray for those who are in our military and serving as firefighters and police officers and EMS, and we do pray for them. But we also remember folks who are retired, who have served this country, whether for 2 years in war or peace or a career. Lord, we pray for folks who are retired from police service and firefighters and others, Lord. Those who are retired from working in our hospitals and other places. Lord, some of them are wounded in body and spirit. We ask you to be with all of them and help us to be grateful for those who dedicate their lives to public service, to keeping us safe. We lift them up and pray for them. Pray for one another and church members on our list. For those celebrating significant birthdays now or in the coming weeks. For those who led our VBS, our guest preacher last week, and others who scrambled to make worship happen. Lord, I'm grateful for the leaders of this church. We ask your blessing on one another, on this nation, on the world that you created and called good. Lord, hear all our prayers as we pray together the prayer Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Can you hear me? I think that's fine. Good morning.
Good morning.
Please stand with me as you're able, and let's sing our praise songs this morning. There is an endless song echoes in my soul. I hear the music ring, and though the storms may come, I am holding on to the rock I cling. How can I keep from singing your praise? How can I ever say enough? How amazing is your love?
Are there children here who would like to come down for a time with me? I don't see anybody. Will you be children of all ages for me? Okay. I love this new stole. Had there been children here, I would have asked them to show me their handprints. See if they remember from VBS where they stamped their hand on this wonderful stole that I will treasure. I hope it's for me and I don't have to leave it here in the office. It says VBS 2023, so it must be for me. Usually little handprints are dirty. There are smudges in the kitchen, there are smudges in the house. And here they are with hands around my neck. When I was a student back in the 1980s at Louisville Seminary, I did a year-long internship at Highland Presbyterian Church in Louisville. And when I left, they gave me the stoles you often see me wear. There's one for each of the liturgical colors. And I often wear the green one, and I was going to wear it today. Because a member of that church named Jean, I don't remember her last name, but she presented the stoles to me at the end of my year, and she said, now when you wear these, think of us hugging you around your neck and praying for you in ministry. That was almost more meaningful to me than when they laid hands on me to ordain me a minister 2 years later. But I will always treasure that gift and think of that congregation hugging me. Now I'll have this. And I'll think of you and the children of this church hugging me or maybe tugging at my robe or my pants. VBS was such fun, and there was lots of that, hugging and tugging and things. Thank you for those of you who were here and helped with VBS 2 weeks ago. It was really good. And I'll close by saying, those of you who were here last week got to hear my friend, Dr. Linda Simmons. And I'm told that she talked about her experience in June of having that surgery. I was very worried that she would not be able to be here as the guest preacher. And I wasn't sure which one of you would be the guest preacher because I was going to class last Sunday. Isn't it good when we can gather and laugh together and be joyful in the house of the Lord? Let's pray. Lord God, thank you for so many different things, for the children of this church, even the ones who aren't here today, for gathering us in your name, O Lord, for our friendship, for our laughter, for the church. In Jesus' name, amen.
this a favorite Bible story of mine. It is often read at the time of the Easter season because it takes place on Easter Sunday afternoon on the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. It's a long reading, but it's familiar and wonderful. Listen for the word of God. Now, that same day, there were two of them going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and walked with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. He said to them, "What are you discussing while you walk along?" They stood still and looked sad. One of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who doesn't know about these things that have taken place here in these days?" "What things?" "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. Now the chief priests and the leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped he would be the one to redeem Israel. Yes, besides all this, it's now the third day, and some of the women in our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning. They didn't find his body. They came back to us and told us they had seen visions of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see him." Then Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are. How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary for the Messiah to suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village where they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us. It's almost evening. The day is nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning with us while he was talking with us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and their companions together, and they were saying, "The Lord's risen indeed. He's appeared to Simon." And they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of this, his holy word. I like this story for many reasons. The surprise presence of Jesus. Also, because it's a story of travel. I like to travel. Never met Jesus on the road that I know of. We just got back from a trip out west, and I learned so much, and it's so different. It snowed so much last winter, the Sierras are still snow-capped. and some of the passes across are still blocked with snow. It's the end of July. I also like travel books. When I was in 3rd grade, Miss Snyder started reading to us from Richard Halliburton, who wrote great travel books in the 1930s and back in that day. And since then, I've discovered Bill Bryson and William Least Moon and even Mark Twain as a traveler. And of course, he was there in the Sierras and the gold rush times. He wrote about that, some of his great stories. I also, and this perhaps is a little embarrassing to myself, Nancy just can't believe it. I like books about roads and building roads. The first one I read was the National Road, built in the 1830s from Augusta, Georgia to New Orleans, because there was no land connection with the Louisiana Purchase until that road was built across the American South. I love the story of Mr. Flagler's Railroad, how he built it from St. Augustine to Key West, and all of the difficulties of taking the train down along the coast of Florida. Stephen Ambrose wrote a great book about the Transcontinental Railroad, and there are so many others. Yeah, I love reading those, and I want to read more about the roads I traveled on in the Sierras this past week. This morning, I read a Bible story about men on the road, walking 12 miles from Jerusalem to a town called Emmaus, and a stranger met them. A stranger who hadn't heard about the things in Jerusalem, but then opened the scriptures to them and told them, beginning with Moses and going through the whole Old Testament. As they walked, they listened, and he talked, and he told them about the Messiah. Then they welcomed this man into their home. This stranger, they said, "Come and sit down with us." And he broke the bread, probably using the words he had used at the Last Supper, or the words that he had used with the disciples, maybe the feeding of the 5,000 or some other time. Immediately, their eyes were open and they recognized Jesus, and he was gone. The risen Lord had come to be with them and disappeared. Going down the road of life, these two disciples met Jesus. I looked in the Bible to see whether Jesus appeared to single disciples or groups of them. Usually it was groups. He appeared to Mary Magdalene at the tomb, but most of the time, when the risen Jesus appeared, he appeared to the church, to the gathered ones, to 2 or 3 gathered in his name. He appeared to the 11. John has most of the stories about the risen Jesus in Jerusalem and at the lake shore and wonderful things. After all, it's easy to fool one person, but hard to fool a group. The Bible indeed talks about 2 or 3 gathered in Jesus' name, and he's there among them, making church. And I believe that when we gather on Sunday mornings, Jesus is with us, and that's the spark that makes this church so special. There's a tradition in Judaism that teaching and learning should always be in groups. It's easy to fool yourself, but can you convince someone else what you've learned, what you are learning? Maybe you've seen video of Jewish men in their, I'm not sure what it's called, when they wear the knotted vests and other religious artifacts they wear and debate one another. I've seen it several times as they bob and read and try to convince one another what they're reading in the scriptures. I like that. The idea of us being together to talk theology, to be in class together. I've really enjoyed the classes that we've had together the last several years, and I'm not sure what I'm going to teach this fall, but we'll have something good, probably by Zoom and in person. The technology is amazing. I know that there are folks that continue to watch us every Sunday on YouTube. They join those Bible studies by Zoom. Some of you like to come after work. You can come home, eat dinner, turn on the computer, and we have studied together. Never alone, but together, like those who walked the road to Emmaus. And these disciples offered hospitality. Hospitality is as old as Abraham and Sarah. So many biblical laws and commandments about being kind to strangers. How often was Jesus and the disciples, how often were they recipients of the kindness of strangers? Who fed them, who brought them into their houses, who let Jesus teach in their houses. Somebody even let his roof be taken apart so a crippled man could be lowered down in front of Jesus and he healed him. I like this vision of talking with strangers on the road and being surprised by Jesus. We're so unnecessarily afraid these days. Afraid of strangers, afraid of people on the road, afraid to send our kids down the road to walk to school or the school bus. I remember 15 years ago, maybe more, my children would ride the bus to middle school and we'd send them down the road. About 2 blocks away was the bus stop, and then we'd look out and see about 4 cars lined up because everybody kept their child in their car until they walked into the bus. Surely they could have watched each other's kids. We just let the kids go down to the school bus stop. I've had my children say to me, "Dad, we were such free-range children. You let us ride our bikes to the store." Trust one another. It's a part of hospitality. The stranger who was walking with these 2 disciples on the road was not necessarily poor. He may have been headed to an inn or a tavern or a place to spend the night. He may have even had a reservation that he had sent ahead. But they welcomed him into their home. And they sat him at their table. And it was Jesus himself. They didn't know that until he broke the bread. Jesus told a parable about those who welcomed the strangers into their home and cared for them and the sick. In Matthew 25, he said, "When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. When I was alone, you welcomed me. When I was sick, you cared for me. When I was in jail, you visited me." What a wonderful parable. I'll have to preach on that sometime soon. Might be Jesus we meet on the road. Might be Jesus that we welcome. We'll have to keep our eyes open. But the last point of this little sermon is that they saw him in the sacraments. Sacraments came with teaching. Jesus taught them all along the road, and then they sat down at the table, and he broke the bread of communion. And their eyes were open, and they recognized him. I'm a very loyal Presbyterian, and I follow the rules. And we only have communion in the whole church. Maybe an elder or a deacon and I will take it to someone who's homebound or in the hospital, but we always have communion together. I know other denominations will have private mass or private communion service, but we do that in church and on special occasions. Some of y'all know about Presbyterian pilgrimage, which this church was very much a part of. Sometimes it's called Crucio or the Walk to Emmaus. And communion is a very important part of that retreat setting. There are other times. Some of you all have been on pilgrimages of your own, walking to Santiago, Spain, the Camino de Santiago, walking along in the footsteps of the saints. Others of you have been to Israel or Rome. It was very special to me to be at the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem with a group of pastors that I was studying with, and we were in Jerusalem, and one of our leaders, a professor, had a communion service there in that garden. It was so very special to have communion in Jerusalem. Others of you may have been to other special places. Sometimes the most special communion is when I bring it to the hospital or to one of your homes, and we share in the meal that the church had had. It can be very healing and special. Years ago, Nancy and I were traveling with a church group to South Africa, and to have communion in a township. I did not know the language that the minister was using, but I recognized the bread and the cup and felt very special. Our other baptism in the Presbyterian Church, can you name it? I'm sorry, the other sacrament, I gave it away. Okay, you know, the other sacrament in the Presbyterian Church is baptism. In our sacraments, Jesus is present. Every time I do a baptism, I remind you to remember your baptism and all that it means. Welcome, and welcome into the church. In the sacraments, Jesus is present. I like being on the road. I like books about roads and trips and travels. And whether we're on the road or in our houses, we can welcome strangers, practice hospitality. In that hospitality, we might meet Jesus, as those disciples did. When we gather at the table or at a baptism in our church, some of y'all are visitors, some of y'all are strangers. I hope you feel welcome. You might be Jesus meeting us for the first time. In 2 weeks, we'll gather again. I don't know where we'll be. I hope we're back in the sanctuary. We'll have communion again. And I hope in these 2 weeks of preparation, you'll remember that they saw Jesus in the breaking of the bread. Amen.
Please join us in saying what we believe in the affirmation of faith. We believe and confess only one God, who can do all things, is all wise, all good, all just, and all merciful. We believe that everything required for our salvation has been offered and communicated to us in Jesus Christ. The wisdom of God, God's eternal Son. Jesus Christ clothed himself in our flesh, God and human in one person. We believe that we are illuminated in faith by the unfathomable grace of the Holy Spirit. God imparts this gracious gift. By faith we receive grace to live holy lives in awe and reverence for God. For we receive what the gospel promises when God gives us the Holy Spirit. Please stand if you are able, and we will sing our last hymn, Will You Let Me Be Your Servant? And it should be on the other side of the
Servant.
encourage you to stay, to greet one another, to be fellowship, to be the church together. But when you do go out, look where Christ might be. He might surprise us. People ask, in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. Amen.